Compassion is circumscribed by fear of accountability. In all these instances, with the US attempting to have an open border and then requesting a wall, closing it, separating families, traumatizing children, traumatizing families, all those conversations aren't really attached to how these people became refugees. You know, people are risking their lives, and they know they're risking their lives. They know this is not an easy journey. So where they're coming from, they are weighing it out. It has to be tons worse. And we can't even begin to understand what they are fleeing because it requires us to do a radical confrontation with the hand that we played in it.
We in America are immigrants, or the children of immigrants. We are one people, but a people welded from many nations and races.
I think the best way to describe them is to be more like a summer camp.
I think it's a complex scenario with believing that the parents of a detained child would want to leave their child in that detained center as opposed to bringing them back to the home country. And I think when you place a parent with such a difficult decision, you have to trust that they're making intuitively what they think is the best decision.
And whether or not these children end up staying in the United States or going back to the country that they were born in, I think if we want to nourish a healthy future, then we have to give these children the best possible chance of succeeding. And that means that the conditions within detention centers need to be developmentally appropriate.
And the children are still here. There's not only are they still here, but the numbers are growing. It's not getting better. And that's something that I think is really missing and that people don't understand.
We want to keep families together whenever possible. When they're separated, expedite reunification, and this is in line with the policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics. When we do have children and parents who are detained or immigrant families in the community, it's clear that they do need access to medical and mental health services, and that should happen during the family separation period and after.
The children are being sent to different places throughout the country, and unfortunately hearing stories that they are being placed in families now, so it will make them possibly untrackable to their parents. This was clearly also done to enslaved Africans who were separated from their children, and their children were sold off to another plantation so they wouldn't have one emotional bonds and so that they could be inducted as laborers. So this is a repetition of multiple histories.
Much of the story of this country has been the story of race, labor, and migration. I mean, this is the story of slavery. This is the story of Chinese workers building the Transcontinental Railroad, and then when the railroad was over, saying we don't want them anymore. And then when you have Asian exclusion, this is when the United States turns to Mexican workers who were allowed in, but really not accepted. And one of the things that happened in the 1960s, it was really part of the Civil Rights Movement, was a Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Immigration Amendments in 1965. And that ended a system that expressly discriminated against immigration from Asia, from Africa, and even from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so there's an attempt here to cut back on immigration, but in ways that try to return to the country of the 1950s. And so I don't think it's any accident that we're having measures that I think are fairly characterized as voter suppression, at the same time as there's an attempt to restrict citizenship, even take citizenship away from people. And I think it's no accident that at this moment there's also severe enforcement, especially against the Latino population of this country.
Anybody that's been studying the history of immigration to the States, the history of naturalization, knows that every couple of decades there is this return to nativism. As horrible and torturous as what is happening is right now, if this administration thinks it's a deterrent, it probably isn't. People are gonna try again, and if they're being separated, they're gonna try as hard as they can to be reunited. It's gonna create violence, decades of trauma, in the bodies of the children, in the bodies of the parents, and people are still going to try to flee the most desperate of conditions.
Children often feel abandoned and neglected. And there's a special awful kind of forced separation, which is called ambiguous loss. It's when children or loved ones are separated and they don't know the whereabouts of their loved one. There's even uncertainty about whether their loved ones are alive or dead. In terms of kind of medical or psychiatric diagnoses, family separation leads to depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
So I don't want to be someone who says immigration helps absolutely everyone. I think it helps most people, but the people who have legitimate complaints about it, I think there are ways to help them that are much more constructive than building a wall. If immigrants can come in and displace people who've been here for a long time, who are citizens, that's not a failure of immigration, which is actually contributing to the economy. What's actually it's a failure is our educational system. And our ability to adapt to an economy so that is changing. And so think about what we could do with even the most modest estimate of what it would cost to build a wall. 25 billion, 35 billion. How many people could we retrain in the Rust Belt for that kind of money? How many entrepreneurial grants could we create?
While it may seem like the public perception is set in stone, it's not. People can change. People can change the way they feel. People can meet someone and it changes their entire world and their entire life.
Young people are excited about the world, and that's like fuel to be able to make the world better.
What we have to do in this moment is really re-examine the script we have about this country. Then we can have a real future rooted in respecting and embracing people from a place of celebrating difference, not trying to flatten it out.